The locksmith's pick was scratching at my front door, and I sat in the dark and let it. It was 9 o'clock on Christmas Eve. The house was cold on purpose. I knew exactly who was standing on my porch because I knew their headlights, and I knew the sound of my brother laughing when he thinks he has already won. My parents were out there, so was Tyler. What they carried in their hands that night was worse than a locksmith. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories. I'm Brooke, and I'm 36. This is the story of every Christmas they kept me out of the house, and the one Christmas they tried to break into mine. If you have ever been the empty chair at someone's table, this one is for you. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. For 20 years, there was no room for me at their table. They never once imagined I would be the one deciding who got through the door. And they had no idea who was already inside, sitting in the dark, waiting with me. The first Christmas I remember counting chairs. I was 8 years old. We had a long table with a scratched oak top, and every December set it like a magazine spread. Cloth napkins, the good plates, a centerpiece of pine cones she dusted with fake snow. I counted the places that year because I had learned even at 8 to count. There was a chair for my father, a chair for my mother, a chair for Tyler, who was 4, 2 chairs for my grandparents, 1 for an aunt, and then the table ran out. I stood in the doorway in my church dress and waited for someone to notice the math. My mother noticed me noticing. She did not get angry. That was the thing people never understood about her. She crouched down, smoothed my collar, and gave me a small, sad smile. The kind you give a child who has asked a hard question. "We can only set so many places, honey," she said. Then she handed me a plate and pointed me toward the kitchen. I ate my Christmas dinner that year on a stool by the stove, listening to the laughter in the other room. I told myself it was a one-time thing, a crowded year, too many relatives. I was a smart kid, and smart kids are very good at explaining away the things that hurt them. But the next year there was a chair short again, and the year after that the relatives changed. The aunts stopped coming, the grandparents passed, and still somehow the table never had room for me. The shortage was never about chairs. It took me 20 years to understand that the shortage was always only about me. I want to be clear about something because people always assume the worst. No one ever hit me. No one screamed at me or locked me in a closet or told me I was worthless. If they had, maybe I would have understood it sooner. Cruelty announces itself. Absence just lets you wonder. What I got instead was a careful, quiet kind of nothing. On Christmas morning, the presents under the tree had little name tags in my mother's looping handwriting. Greg, Tyler, Mom, then a few for cousins. I would kneel on the carpet and read every tag twice, the way you reread a test grade hoping it changed. Mine was never there. There would be a gift for me eventually. Usually a practical one handed over later in the day with an apology built into it. We didn't want to spoil you. In every family photo, I am standing slightly to the side, half out of frame, like the camera couldn't quite decide if I belonged in the shot. I learned to do for myself early. I made my own breakfast at 7. I packed my own lunches. I taught myself to braid my own hair, watching my reflection in the toaster. By the time I was 12, I could run a household, and nobody had asked me to. I thought for years that if I just became useful enough, helpful enough, good enough, the table would make room. So I tried harder than any kid should ever have to try. I never once asked myself the real question, the one sitting under all of it like a stone underwater. Why was it only me? Why, in a family of 4, did the math only ever fail to include one person? There was one thing in our house nobody was allowed to touch. On my mother's dresser sat a small silver frame turned slightly toward the wall. Inside was a photograph of a hospital blanket, pale yellow, folded the way you fold something around a baby. There was no baby visible in the picture, just the blanket and my mother's hands. I asked about it once, maybe at 10. My mother took the frame out of my fingers so gently and so fast that I never asked again. "That's not for little hands," she said, and every December around the middle of the month, she would go quiet. Not sad in a way you could point to, just somewhere else. She would forget to start dinner. She would sit at the window with her coffee going cold. My father would walk softer those days, like the floor might break. I didn't have the words for it then. I only knew that the worst of my mother's distance always came right before Christmas, like a tide that pulled out before it pulled me under. The shortage at the table, the quiet at the window. The frame turned to the wall. I felt without understanding that these things were connected. That somewhere in my mother there was a room I had never been let into, and that I had been born standing outside its door. I was a child. I assumed, the way children do, that whatever was wrong was somehow my fault. It would be more than 2 decades before I learned what that yellow blanket meant, and when I finally did, it explained everything and excused nothing. I left the day after my 18th birthday in the spring of 2007. I had been saving for it the way you save for a flight out of a country at war. Babysitting money, lunch money. I didn't spend a summer of scooping ice cream and a winter of shoveling driveways. By 18, I had $1,100 rolled in a sock and a battered Corolla I'd bought for $400 of it. I packed 1 duffel bag, clothes, a toothbrush, my high school diploma, and the only photo of myself I owned where I was actually in the center of the frame, taken by a friend's mother who didn't know our family's rules. Nobody tried to stop me. My mother was at the sink. My father read his paper. Tyler, 14 and already untouchable, didn't look up from the television. Call when you get wherever you're going, my mother said, and that was the whole goodbye. I drove for 3 hours and stopped at a diner off the highway and cried exactly once hard in the parking lot. Then I went inside and ordered eggs and made myself a promise over the worst coffee in Ohio. Someday I would have a place of my own, a real one. A place with a door and a lock, and my name on the deed where no one could ever decide there wasn't room for me. I didn't know how. I just knew I would. I left that house at 18 with 1 bag and 1 promise that someday I would build a place no one could lock me out of. If you have ever packed a bag like that, you already know how this feels. Stay with me, comment, and subscribe. I started with a bucket. That's not a metaphor. I started cleaning houses with a yellow bucket, a box of rags, and supplies I bought at the dollar store. My first client was a tired single mother who couldn't keep up after a double shift. I cleaned her kitchen so thoroughly she cried. And she told 2 friends, and they told 2 friends. For the first year, I slept in the Corolla more nights than I want to admit, parked behind a grocery store with the seat reclined and a blanket I bought at a thrift shop. I showered at a gym I paid $9 a month to belong to. Every dollar that came in, I split into 3 jars. Gas, supplies, the someday house. Here is the thing about being the kid who was never quite enough. You learn to never let yourself fail because you've decided failure is the proof they were right. So, I overdid everything. I scrubbed baseboards no one would ever check. I came back to fix things no one had complained about. I worked when I was sick, worked when I was exhausted. Worked holidays because holidays paid double, and because I had nowhere I was wanted anyway. It made me very good. It also nearly broke me more than once. By 25, I had hired my first 2 employees. By 28, I had a real office, a logo, and a name. Booth Home Care. We didn't just clean. We watched over people's homes when they traveled, managed their move-outs, cared for the houses of the elderly. I was building a company out of the exact thing I had never been given. A place where everyone belonged and no one was ever left standing in the doorway counting chairs. You'd think growing up would have fixed it. It didn't. The first Christmas after I left, I called home from a payphone outside that grocery store. My mother sounded surprised to hear from me, then distracted. There was noise behind her, music and voices. "Is that a party?" I asked. It was a Christmas party. I had not been told there was one. "Oh, it's just family and a few neighbors," she said, in the same gentle voice she'd used over the church dress. "We can only set so many places, honey. You understand?" I was 19 and 3 hours away, and I still said, "Of course, I understand." I called less after that. Every year or 2, I'd try again around the holidays, hoping the math had finally changed. It never did. Meanwhile, Tyler got everything I wasn't getting. His 16th birthday was a catered backyard event. When he graduated barely, they rented a hall. When he wanted a car, there was a car. When he wanted college money he didn't use, there was college money. I watched all of it from a distance through the few cousins who still spoke to me. And I told myself I didn't care. I cared. I want to be honest about that because pretending you don't care is its own kind of lie. I cared so much I built an entire life around proving I didn't need them. But every December when the radio played the same carols and the stores hung the same lights, I was 8 years old again, standing in a doorway in my church dress, doing the math, coming up short. The wound didn't close. I just got better at working around it. I should tell you about my brother. Tyler was 4 years younger than me and raised in a completely different family, though we shared the same address. Where I learned to do for myself, Tyler learned that someone would always do for him. If he broke something, it was replaced. If he failed something, a reason was found. If he wanted something, the answer started at yes, and only moved if my father was tired. He grew up sure of one thing above all else, that the world owed him a soft landing. By the time he was an adult, Tyler had become a man who started things and finished none of them. A lawn business that folded, a vending route that vanished, a consulting venture that consisted mostly of a website and a leased truck. Each time it ended, my parents covered the shortfall. They mortgaged a little more of their own security every time and called it helping. I knew most of this secondhand from a cousin named Penny, who couldn't help narrating the family to me over the phone. Your folks bailed Tyler out again, she'd say, like weather. That boy could fall in a lake and come out with a fish in his pocket. But the fish were running out. The last I'd heard, Tyler had married a woman named Melissa, and they had bought more house than they could afford, and filled it with more things than they could pay for. And underneath all the bailouts, all the soft landings, a debt was quietly building, the kind that doesn't go away when mom writes a check. I didn't know the number yet. I didn't know how desperate he was getting. But I knew my brother, and I knew that a man raised to believe the world owes him will eventually come to collect from whoever is doing best. The last time I saw the whole family together before all of this was at a funeral. My grandmother on my father's side had died. The one relative who used to slip me $10 and call me her second sunshine. I drove 4 hours to be there. I wore black and I sat in the back. And afterward at the reception in the church basement, I tried to be part of my family for one afternoon. I refilled the coffee, I cleared plates, I did the things I do, the useful things, hoping useful might finally be enough. Tyler found me at the sink. He'd been drinking the cheap funeral wine, and he leaned against the counter and watched me work with a little smile. "You don't have to do that," he said. "The church ladies handle it." "I don't mind," I said. He studied me for a second. Then he said the thing I have never been able to unhear. "You know, you don't have to keep showing up, right? Nobody expects you to. You're not really one of us, Brooke." He said it kindly. That was the worst part. He said it the way you'd tell someone they had spinach in their teeth. A small, helpful correction. Then he wandered off to find more wine, and I stood there with a dish towel in my hands and the water running and the words settling into me like cold getting into your bones. "You're not really one of us." I dried my hands. I set the towel down, and somewhere in that church basement, between the bad coffee and the folding chairs, I stopped waiting for a chair at their table. If I wasn't really one of them, then their math could no longer break my heart. I would build my own table, and I would decide who sat at it. The years after that funeral were the best of my life, and I built every one of them myself. Booth Home Care grew the way good things grow slowly, and then all at once. By 2025, I had 4 vans, 11 employees, and contracts with half the nice neighborhoods in the county. We had a reputation. When people in those big houses went to Florida for the winter, they handed me their keys without a second thought, because they knew I treated a home like it was sacred. I knew the value of a home in a way the rich families I served never quite did. They had always had one. I had spent my whole life trying to earn one. I paid my people well and on time. I gave Penny's daughter her first job. I learned the parts of business no one teaches you. The contracts, the insurance, the careful paperwork that keeps a small company from being eaten alive. I became, without ever quite noticing it happen, a woman of some means. Not rich the way TV means rich, but comfortable. Secure, the kind of secure where you check your bank balance and feel calm instead of sick. My family had no idea. We barely spoke. They still pictured me, I think, as the girl who left with a duffel bag scraping by somewhere, paying for my pride. They never asked what I did. They never asked how I was doing. And because they never asked, they never saw it coming. They didn't know about the vans or the employees or the savings. They certainly didn't know what I was about to do with all of it. I had spent 15 years building the foundation. Now I was ready to build the house, the actual house, the one I'd promised myself in a diner parking lot at 18. I found it in September of 2025 on a street called Maple Hollow. It was the biggest house on the block, a 3-story brick place with a wraparound porch and a turret room and windows that caught the evening light. It had been built in 1912 and loved and then neglected, and it needed work. The kind of work that scares most buyers off. It didn't scare me. I had cleaned 100 houses like it. I knew its bones. The day I walked through it, I stood in the empty front hall and I could see it. A long table by the windows, a real one set for whoever I chose. I bought it with my own money. Every dollar of the down payment came from that bucket and that truck and 15 years of refusing to fail. At the closing, I signed my name so many times, my hand cramped. And I didn't care because every signature put that house a little more firmly in my hands. When the lawyer slid the final document across the table, I read the words at the top 3 times. Grantee, Brooke Booth, sole owner, sole owner. I had been a person nobody quite counted, and now there was a legal document that counted me as the only one. I drove to Maple Hollow that night and sat on my own front porch in the dark and let myself feel it. 18-year-old me in the diner parking lot would not have believed it. I had built the place no one could lock me out of. I should have been able to leave it there. A happy ending. But I knew my family, and I knew that the moment they learned what I had, the math at their table was going to change in a way I wasn't ready for. It took about 3 weeks for the news to travel. Penny, of course, she mentioned the house to her sister, who mentioned it to my mother, and the temperature of my entire family changed overnight. My mother called me. My mother, who had not called me on a non-holiday in years, called me on a Tuesday to say she'd been thinking about me and wondered how I was. Her voice was warm in a way I didn't trust, because I had spent 36 years learning the difference between her real warmth and her useful warmth. "I hear you bought a big old place," she said, light as anything. "We'd love to come see it. It's been too long, honey." 2 days later, Tyler texted me for the first time in a year. No greeting, just questions. How many bedrooms, what I paid, whether it was a good investment, and then one that made me set my phone down on the counter and look at it for a long moment. "Who's the house under? Just you? Just you?" I read that little phrase several times. There are questions people ask out of curiosity, and there are questions people ask because they are measuring something. I knew the difference. I'd run a business for 15 years. I knew when someone was sizing up an asset. I didn't answer right away. I made myself a cup of tea, and I thought about the funeral and the church basement. And you're not really one of us. People don't suddenly remember you exist. They remember what you have. The warmth wasn't for me. It never had been. It was for the house. And every instinct I'd sharpened over a lifetime of watching this family was telling me very quietly to be careful. Here is where most people in a story like this make their mistake. They feel the bad feeling, and then they talk themselves out of it. It's just family. I'm being paranoid. They wouldn't. I didn't do that. I had spent my whole life trusting the quiet feeling because the quiet feeling was the only one that had ever told me the truth. So I called my lawyer, not a friend, not a cousin, the real estate attorney who had handled my closing, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Rachel Caldwell. I told her about the calls, the sudden interest, the who's the house under. I asked her point blank, "Can someone take a house out from under you if they really wanted to?" There was a pause on the line, the kind a professional makes before she tells you something you won't like. "It happens more than you'd think," Rachel said. "It's one of the fastest growing crimes in the country right now." She explained it to me plainly. Deed fraud. Someone forges your signature on a quitclaim deed, a simple form that transfers property. They file it with the county recorder. The recorder does not verify signatures. They just record what's handed to them. And just like that, on paper, your house can appear to belong to someone else. The terrifying part, Rachel said, is who does it. Studies say roughly 9 out of 10 times, it's not a stranger, it's family or a friend. 9 out of 10. Family. I sat with the phone against my ear and felt the floor of my stomach drop. Not because it was unbelievable, but because it was the most believable thing I had ever heard. "There has to be a way to protect yourself," I said. "There is," Rachel said. "Let me tell you about it." What Rachel told me about was a service the county recorder offered for free, a property fraud alert. You sign up with your name and your property, and from that moment on, the instant anything is recorded against your house, anything at all, you get a notification, a deed, a lien, a transfer. You become the first to know instead of the last. It won't stop someone from filing. Rachel warned me. The recorder still takes whatever's handed across the counter. The signature problem is structural. They can't check it at the window, but you'll know the second it lands. And knowing is everything. I enrolled that afternoon. I went onto the county website, entered my name and the parcel number, and clicked the box. A confirmation email arrived a few minutes later. I printed it, then I printed something else. The recorded copy of my own deed, the one that said Brooke Booth, sole owner with the county's stamp in the corner. I laid them side by side on my kitchen table, and I looked at them for a long time. 2 pages on my kitchen table. One said the house was mine. The other promised I'd be the first to know if anyone ever tried to say it wasn't. I didn't tell my family I'd done it. I didn't tell anyone. I just put the 2 pages in a folder, and I put the folder in a drawer, and I kept my voice warm and vague every time my mother called. I let them think I was the same girl with the duffel bag because the quiet feeling was still talking to me. And the quiet feeling said, "Don't show them your hand." I sat at my own kitchen table with 2 pieces of paper and a feeling something was coming. If you have ever sensed family circling something you built, you'll want to see what they did next. Subscribe so you don't miss it. The number came to me finally through Penny. It always came through Penny. She called in late October, breathless with the kind of news she pretended to feel bad about sharing. "I shouldn't say anything," she said, which is how she begins everything. Tyler was in trouble. Real trouble this time. He had personally guaranteed a business loan around $90,000 for a venture that had collapsed by summer. The lender wasn't a family member who could be soothed with a holiday dinner. The lender wanted $90,000. He and Melissa had fallen behind on the house they rented, and the landlord had started the paperwork to put them out. My parents, Penny said, had finally hit their own limit. They had been bailing Tyler out for 30 years, and there was nothing left to bail with. Their savings were thin. Their own house was mortgaged for his last failure. "Your mother's beside herself," Penny said. "She keeps saying the family's going to lose everything." I listened, and I did the math the way I have always done the math. $90,000 of debt. A man raised to believe the world owes him a soft landing. A sister with a paid-for mansion he just learned existed. A mother newly, suddenly warmly interested in seeing that house. The pieces did not arrange themselves into anything good. I hung up with Penny and stood in my big, quiet kitchen and understood that the warmth, the calls, the visit my mother kept proposing were not the beginning of a reconciliation. They were reconnaissance. Somewhere 40 minutes away, in a rented house with a landlord at the door, my brother was looking at the one asset in the family with no debt against it and no man in the picture to defend it, and he was getting desperate enough to do something about it. In November, my mother called with an invitation, the first one in nearly 20 years. "We want you to come home for Christmas," she said, and her voice did something it had not done in my whole life. It tried to sound like it loved me. The whole family Christmas Eve dinner, the way we used to do it. "There's a place for you, Brooke. There's always been a place for you. There's always been a place for you." I had waited my entire childhood to hear that sentence, and now that it had finally come, I knew with a certainty that made me a little sick, that it was a lie. You don't set a place for someone you've spent 20 years counting out of the math, not unless you suddenly need them at the table for some reason of your own. I said I'd think about it. Then Tyler texted. He'd been texting more lately. Casual, chummy, like we were close. This one was framed as concern. "Hey, with a big old house like that, you gotta keep your important papers safe. Deed, title, all that. Where do you even keep stuff like that?" "A safe, fireproof box." I looked at that message for a long time. He wasn't asking how I was. He was asking where I kept the deed. I didn't delete it. I screenshotted it with the date and timestamp showing. and I started a folder on my phone. I named the folder something boring so it wouldn't catch anyone's eye. And I began saving everything. Every text, every voicemail, every too warm call. I wasn't paranoid. I was a small business owner who had learned the hard way that the most expensive thing you can do is fail to keep a record. They thought they were reeling me in. They had no idea I'd started keeping the receipts. Then Melissa got involved, and that changed the shape of the thing. I'd only met my brother's wife a handful of times. She was sharp where Tyler was soft, organized where he was scattered. She grew up poor, the kind of poor that never quite leaves you, and she had spent her adult life white-knuckling her way toward safety. I understood her, honestly, better than I understood my brother. I just understood her the way you understand a storm. She called me one evening, friendly, chatting about nothing. And then she steered the conversation somewhere very specific. You know, Tyler and I are thinking about doing a quitclaim between us for tax stuff, she said, breezy. Such a confusing process. When you bought your place, did you have to get the signature notarized? Like, does the county actually check who signed it, or do they just file it? There it was. Does the county actually check who signed it? That is not a question a person asks for tax reasons. That is a question a person asks when they are mapping out exactly how much they can get away with. I kept my voice easy. I said I wasn't sure that the lawyer handled all that. That paperwork bored me to tears. I played the woman who didn't pay attention to her own affairs. I could practically hear her relax through the phone. After she hung up, I sat very still. Tyler had the desperation and the entitlement, but Melissa had the plan. She was the one doing the research, learning the mechanics, testing the locks on the system to see which ones were loose. My brother was going to be the hand. My sister-in-law was the mind. And somewhere in their rented house, the two of them were sketching out a way to take the only thing I had ever built for myself. My mother called again in early December, and this time she said the quiet part, without meaning to. We were talking about Christmas, about whether I'd come and she was working hard to sell me on it. Then she drifted the way she does into talking about the house, my house. It's just so much house for one person, she said. A place like that, it really ought to be for the whole family. Somewhere everyone can gather. You shouldn't be rattling around in there all alone, honey. And then gently, fondly, like she was sharing a warm old family, saying, "You know how it is. We can only set so many places." She didn't even hear herself say it. For 20 years, that sentence had meant there's no room for you. Now, turned inside out, it meant something worse. It meant you're the one person too many. It meant a house with my name on the deed was to her a table where I was once again the extra chair that ought to be cleared away. I closed my eyes and held the phone and understood the whole thing at last. They weren't asking to visit. They were planning to move in, take over, absorb the house into the family, the way they had absorbed Tyler's debts and Tyler's failures. Except this time, the family didn't have any money left to do it with. This time, they'd have to take it. "I'll let you know about Christmas," I said, calm as a lake. After she hung up, I stood in my front hall by the spot where I'd pictured my long table, and I felt something settle in me, cold and clear and almost peaceful. They were coming for my house. The only question left was how, and I intended to find out before they did anything I couldn't undo. My first instinct was to call Tyler and tell him I knew, to say in plain words, "I see exactly what you and your wife are doing, and it stops now. I'm a fixer. When I see a problem, I want to get in front of it." So I called Rachel instead to ask how to slam the door before they could open it. What she told me changed my whole approach. "If you confront them now, here's what happens," Rachel said. "They get scared, they back off, and you've got nothing. A warm phone call and your own suspicion. No crime has been committed yet. You can't prosecute a plan. So I just wait," I said. "I sit here and let them forge my name. I'm not telling you to do nothing," she said carefully. "I'm telling you that the law needs them to actually do it. Forgery isn't real until the forged document exists and they try to use it. Right now you have a fraud alert that will tell you the instant they file. If they file, that's a felony recorded with their names on it. If they then come to take possession, that's the whole crime witnessed. You don't stop a trap by warning the animal. You stop it by being ready when it springs." I didn't love it. Every protective instinct in me wanted to act, to control, to fix it before it could happen. But I understood. If I tipped my hand, they'd melt back into the warm-voiced fog and try again later, smarter. If I stayed the clueless girl with the duffel bag right up until the moment they committed the crime in full, I could end it for good. So, I made the hardest choice of my life. I decided to let them think they were winning, and I started very quietly to get ready. Once I stopped pushing back, they got bolder, the way people do when they think the coast is clear. The text from Tyler changed. They lost the chummy pretense and started carrying an edge. The edge of a man who has already decided how this ends and is just managing me toward it. "You really shouldn't have a place that big to yourself," he wrote one night. "That kind of house should belong to someone who actually takes care of family, not someone who ran off and forgot where they came from." There it was again, dressed up in new clothes, not someone who ran off. The same song from the church basement. "You're not really one of us, Brooke." Now with a price tag attached. Another night, he wrote, "Mom and Dad are getting old. That house could keep this whole family afloat. Think about somebody other than yourself for once." I read these the way I'd read a deposition. I noted the dates. I watched a man build a complete record of motive. And I let him because I had learned from Rachel that the best evidence in the world is the kind your target hands you for free. I typed back things that were warm and non-committal. "I hear you. Let's talk after the holidays." It's a lot to think about. Each reply was a little piece of bait, just enough to keep him assured I was softening. Inside, I was anything but. Every cruel, entitled message landed on the same old bruise: the doorway, the church dress, the math that came up short. But the bruise didn't make me weak anymore. It made me certain, and certainty is a very quiet, very patient thing. I closed the folder on my phone, and I waited for the alert I knew was coming. It came on a Wednesday, the 3rd of December at 4:47 in the afternoon. I was in my office reviewing route sheets when my phone buzzed with an email I'd been bracing for since October. The subject line was clinical and cold, and it stopped my heart. Property fraud alert. A new document has been recorded against your monitored property. I set down my pen. I opened it slowly. The way you open a door you already know has someone behind it. A new instrument had been recorded with the county that afternoon. Document type quit claim deed parcel mine, and then the part that made the room go very still and very loud at the same time. Grantor Brooke Booth. Grantee Tyler Booth. According to the county's official records, I had just signed my house over to my brother. I had signed nothing. I had been sitting in this office all day with witnesses and a calendar full of meetings. Someone had taken my name, forged it onto a deed, and walked it across the counter at the county recorder. And the county, exactly as Rachel had warned, had simply stamped it and filed it without ever checking whether the signature was real. For one long moment, I just looked at the screen. 20 years of being counted out of the math, and now they had used a single sheet of paper to count me out of my own house. I want to tell you I felt rage. I think I should have. What I actually felt was the opposite of rage. It was clarity, pure and cold and almost calm. The trap I had set without quite admitting I was setting it had just sprung its first half. They had committed a felony in writing with their names on it. Now I had work to do. I drove to the county recorder's office the next morning and requested a certified copy of the recorded deed. I paid the small fee. I waited at a plastic counter under fluorescent lights while a clerk pulled it. And then I held in my hands the document that said my home was no longer mine. I made myself read every line. There was my name, Brooke Booth, in a signature that was not my signature. Whoever made it had clearly studied one of mine. Maybe from an old Christmas card, maybe from a document Tyler had access to. They'd gotten the shape of the B right. The rest was wrong in a way only I would notice. The slant of the T, the loop on the H. It was the forgery of someone who'd practiced just enough to fool a stranger and not nearly enough to fool me. Below it sat a notary stamp and a notary signature, certifying that I had appeared in person and signed willingly. I had done no such thing. I had never met this notary in my life. I stood there in that quiet office, holding the proof of the worst thing my family had ever done to me. And I did not cry, and I did not call my brother to scream at him. I had learned long ago that screaming is what you do when you have no other power. I had other power now. I took out my phone and photographed every page. I noted the recording number, the date, the notary's name. I was already building it in my head, the way I'd built everything, brick by careful brick. Tyler thought he'd stolen my house with a piece of paper. What he'd actually done was hand me a felony with his fingerprints all over it, and he had no idea I already knew. That afternoon, I walked into the police station and filed a report. I sat across from a detective named Ryan Fletcher, a heavy-set man with patient eyes who had clearly seen a lot of families do a lot of terrible things to each other. I laid it all out in order the way I lay out everything. The deed in my name, the recorded forgery, the notary I'd never met, the text from Tyler dated and screenshotted, Melissa's call about whether the county checked signatures, my mother's sudden warmth, and the $90,000 of debt behind it. Detective Fletcher listened without interrupting, and when I finished, he sat back and said, "Ma'am, in 20 years, I have rarely seen a victim walk in this organized. I run a business." I said, "I keep records." He told me what I was dealing with was serious. Forgery of a deed, filing a false instrument with the county. These were felonies, the kind that carry real prison time, not slaps on the wrist. He told me Rachel could file something called a notice of fraudulent deed to flag the record and begin unwinding it in court. And then he said the thing I'd been circling towards since the alert first buzzed. A forged deed on paper is one thing, Fletcher said, but it's stronger, much stronger if they try to act on it, if they show up to take the house. Possession is the part juries understand. You said your mother's been pushing you to come home for Christmas? She has, I said. Then I'd think hard, he said slowly, about what they might do if they believed you weren't home. I looked at him. He looked at me, and in that small gray room, the last piece of the plan I'd been refusing to fully imagine clicked quietly into place. There was one more thing I wanted, and it had nothing to do with the courts. I wanted the truth out where it couldn't be smoothed over. My family had spent my whole life rewriting reality in quiet rooms, deciding who belonged and who didn't with nobody watching. I wanted witnesses this time. I wanted light. So, I called the local paper. There was a reporter named Danielle Whitaker who'd been running a series all fall on the rise of deed and title fraud in our part of the state. I'd been reading it. Her latest piece had a line that stuck with me, that the cruelest version of the crime was the most common one, because most of the time the person stealing your home is someone you'd have led in the front door. I told Danielle my story over coffee. The childhood, the company, the mansion, the forged deed, the texts. She took notes for 2 hours. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. The fact that it's family, she said, that's the part people need to understand. Everyone thinks it's some hacker overseas. It's almost never. It's a brother, a son, somebody at the table. Somebody who couldn't fit me at the table, I said, until I had something they wanted. Danielle asked if she could be there if and when it came to a head. I told her I thought it might come to a head on Christmas Eve, and that if it did, I'd want her to see all of it with her own eyes, so no one could ever say I made it up. She agreed. So now I had 3 things my family never expected me to have: the law in Detective Fletcher, the record in my folder of evidence, and the light in Danielle Whitaker. All I had to do was let them walk in. Detective Fletcher and I met once more in the 3rd week of December to think it through together. He'd done this kind of thing before, and he walked me through the logic the way I'd walk a client through a contract. Here's where their heads are. He said, "Your brother's got a deed now on paper. But a deed isn't worth anything to him until he can act on it. To sell or refinance fast, he needs to show possession. He needs to be in the house with the locks changed, looking like the rightful owner before you even know what hit you." And the fastest way to take possession, I said, is to come when they think it's empty. Fletcher nodded. Exactly. So the question is when they'd believe that. We both already knew the answer. They'd believe it on Christmas Eve because for 20 years, the story my family told themselves was that Brooke spent the holidays alone. Brooke had no one. Brooke was always somewhere else, scraping by unwanted. They had spent 2 decades making me the empty chair. And now, that very story was going to be the thing that trapped them. They would assume the big house on Maple Hollow was dark and empty on Christmas Eve. its lonely owner off somewhere by herself, because that was the only version of me they had ever allowed to exist. "Melissa will want a locksmith," Fletcher said. "Change the locks, establish control, quiet, professional, plausible. If a neighbor asks, they're the new owners. Here's the deed." I thought about my mother on the phone pushing so hard for me to come to their Christmas to be somewhere far from Maple Hollow. The invitation hadn't been an apology. It had been an attempt to get me out of my own house on the one night they planned to take it. So I declined my mother's invitation gently, in a way designed to land exactly right. "I think I'll just have a quiet one at home this year," I told her. "Rest. You know how the season is." I could hear her satisfaction through the phone, the soft little pause of a plan falling into place. She thought she'd confirmed I'd be home alone. Easy to work around. What I'd actually done was confirm the date. On Christmas Eve, I did everything they would expect of an empty house and nothing they would expect of a trap. I parked my car 3 streets over and walked back in the dark. I left the house unlit, every window black. Inside, though, the house was not empty. Detective Fletcher was there and 2 uniformed officers positioned out of sight of the front windows. Danielle Whitaker was there with her camera tucked into the turret room with a clear view of the front hall. Rachel had advised on every step, and I was there, sitting in an armchair in the dark front parlor in my good coat with a folder on my lap. In that folder were 2 pages. The recorded deed that said the house was mine, and the fraud alert confirmation that said I'd be the first to know if anyone said otherwise. The same 2 pages I'd laid on my kitchen table back in the fall. They'd been my anchor through all of it. And now they were going to be Exhibit A. My whole life, my family had set a table that never had room for me. Tonight in the dark, I had set one of my own. Every seat was full. They just didn't know who I'd invited. And somewhere 40 minutes away in the cold, 3 headlights were already pulling out of a driveway in Renfro heading for Maple Hollow. I heard the car before I saw the lights, tires on the gravel of my long driveway. Slow, careful, the sound of people trying not to be heard. Then headlights swept across my dark front windows and went out. Doors opened, voices low, drifting up to the porch in the cold December air. I sat very still in the dark parlor and listened to my family arrive to steal my home. I knew all of them by their voices. Tyler talking too much the way he does when he's nervous and covering it with confidence. "See? Told you place is dead." She's probably off feeling sorry for herself somewhere. A second man's voice, I didn't know, bored and businesslike the locksmith. Then Melissa, sharp and low, telling everyone to keep it down, to hurry up. And behind them, quieter, my parents. My father said almost nothing. My mother said, "Are we sure about this, Tyler?" And Tyler said, "Mom, the house is ours now. It's all legal. We're just taking what's ours." Footsteps on my porch steps. The thunk of a heavy bag sat down, tools clinking inside it. The locksmith said, "Standard deadbolt, 2 minutes." And then the scratch of metal sliding into my lock, the same sound that had opened this whole story. In the turret room above me, I knew Danielle was filming. In the next room, I knew Fletcher and his officers were waiting, still as held breath. I sat with my folder on my lap, and I did not move, and I did not make a sound. 20 years of being kept outside their door, and here they were picking the lock on mine. I had imagined this moment 100 times since the alert first buzzed. Now it was here in the dark, in the cold, with my whole life balanced on the click of a lock. The lock gave with a soft final click. The deadbolt slid back. My front door, the door I had promised 18-year-old me would always have my name on it, swung open into the dark, and my family walked into my house uninvited for the very first time. Melissa came first, a flashlight beam swinging ahead of her, businesslike. Tyler was right behind her, and he wasn't whispering anymore. The second he was across the threshold, the entitlement that had been bred into him for 32 years came roaring back. "Would you look at this place?" he said, his voice filling my dark hall like he already owned the echo. He had papers in his hand. He actually waved them. The forged deed, the proof of his crime, brandished in the air like a flag. All this for her. And now it's ours. The locksmith hovered in the doorway, uneasy now that he could feel the wrongness of it. Melissa was already moving deeper in the flashlight, finding the front parlor, the staircase, the high ceilings. "We change every lock tonight," she was saying. "By tomorrow, we're the owners on record, and in fact, nobody can argue with possession." My mother and father came in last. Slow, my mother's hand finding my father's arm in the dark. "It's so big," my mother murmured, and for 1 second, she sounded almost frightened of it. Then Tyler said the thing that ended any sympathy I might have dredged up. He turned in a slow circle in my front hall in the dark, and he laughed and he said, "She never belonged in a place like this anyway. She never belonged anywhere." That was the moment the door was open. They were inside. The forged deed was in his hand. The locksmith's tools were on the floor. Every element of the crime was complete in full, with witnesses in 2 rooms. I reached over to the lamp beside my chair, and I turned on the light. The room flooded with light, and for a heartbeat, nobody moved. My family stood frozen in my bright front hall, blinking, caught mid-step. And then, as their eyes adjusted, they saw what I had filled my dark house with. Detective Fletcher stepped out of the dining room doorway, calm and unhurried, his badge already in his hand. Behind him came the 2 uniformed officers, and up in the turret stairwell stood Danielle Whitaker, her camera already up, the shutter clicking, capturing every face in the room. I rose from my armchair slowly with my folder in my hand, and I looked at my brother across the front hall of the home I had built. Tyler's mouth opened and closed. The forged deed was still clutched in his fist. Useless now, evidence now. "What is this?" he said, then louder, the panic breaking through. "What is this, Brooke? What did you do?" "Merry Christmas," I said. My voice did not shake. I had thought it might. It didn't. "You can put the deed down, Tyler. The officers behind you would rather you didn't wave it around." That was when he exploded. "This is my house," he shouted, his face going red, spit flying, the cool gone in an instant. "It's legal. It's all legal. I have the papers. You set us up. You faked all this. You are always trying to ruin this family." Melissa had gone white and silent, the flashlight hanging dead at her side, her sharp mind clearly racing through every way this ended and finding no good ones. My mother had both hands over her mouth. My father had not moved at all. He was staring at me, and there was something in his face I had never seen there before, not in 36 years. I stood in the center of my own bright hall, surrounded by the people who had spent 2 decades deciding I didn't belong, and I had never in my life felt so completely, so calmly, like I belonged exactly where I was standing. Detective Fletcher did the talking after that, the way professionals do, steady and quiet, which only made Tyler louder. Fletcher laid it out for all of them, naming each piece as he went. The quitclaim deed recorded on December 3rd, transferring the property from Brooke Booth to Tyler Booth, bearing a signature I had never made. The fraud alert that had notified me the moment it was filed. The texts dated and saved where Tyler explained exactly why he believed the house should be his. The locksmith, who was now talking very fast, explaining that he had simply been hired to change the locks on what he'd been told was a client's own home, and who Fletcher gently informed would be giving a full statement. "Tyler Booth," Fletcher said, "you're under arrest for forgery and filing a fraudulent instrument." The handcuffs came out, and my brother, the man who had told me in a church basement that I wasn't really one of them, was cuffed in the front hall of my house while a reporter photographed his face. Melissa was detained beside him, already talking about lawyers. It was my mother I turned to. She was crying the way she cried at the window every December, except this time the grief had a name, and the name was getting arrested. "Brooke," she said, "Brooke, please, we can fix this. We're family." I looked at her for a long moment. Then I said the thing I had been carrying my entire life, and I said it without anger, which is the only way it could have landed the way it did. "There were always enough places, Mom," I said quietly. "You just never set one for me. So tonight, I set the table myself, and I set it for the police." The red and blue lights of the patrol car turned outside my windows, now washing across the high ceilings of the house I had built from a bucket and a truck. My mother had no answer. For the first time in 36 years, the woman who decided who belonged at the table had nothing left to say. My father didn't run. He didn't argue. While Tyler was being walked to the car, still shouting, and my mother was being guided out behind him, my father sat down. He lowered himself onto the bottom step of my staircase, an old man suddenly looking every one of his 67 years, and he put his face in his hands. The officers let him sit. I came and stood near him. Not too close. For a long moment, he didn't speak. Then he said without looking up, "I always knew it was wrong. What we did to you, the chairs, all of it." His voice cracked. I knew it every single Christmas. And I never said a thing. I didn't tell him it was okay because it wasn't. I didn't forgive him on the spot because forgiveness like that is a thing you earn, not a thing you get handed at the bottom of a staircase. But I saw him for the first time. I saw the whole shape of him. A weak man who had spent 40 years choosing his wife's grief over his own daughter. And who knew the entire time the price I was paying for his silence? Why? I asked him. Why was it always me? He looked up then, and he told me about the baby, the first baby, a girl born and lost before I came, and how my mother had never climbed out of that hole, and how having me so soon after had felt to her like the world replacing something that could not be replaced. It was the yellow blanket in the silver frame. It was the quiet at the window every December. It explained the whole twisted math of my childhood, and none of it made the math right. She grieved a daughter, I said softly, by erasing the one she had. My father had no answer for that either. Here is what happened after, because I know you want to know. Tyler and Melissa were charged with felony forgery and filing a fraudulent instrument. The case never went to trial because the evidence was overwhelming and the recorded deed had both their fingerprints all over the scheme, his hand and her plan. Melissa took a deal and testified that Tyler had pressed the forged signature himself. Tyler took a deal of his own rather than face a jury looking at photographs of him cuffed in my hallway. Both are felons now. The $90,000 he tried to solve by stealing my house is still $90,000. Except now it sits on top of a criminal record. Rachel filed the notice of fraudulent deed, and a judge voided the forged quitclaim within weeks. The house was mine again on paper, the way it had always been mine. In fact, Danielle's story ran on the front page the week after New Year's. She didn't use my name beyond my first, but she told the truth of it, how the person most likely to steal your home is the one you'd let in for Christmas dinner. And her article did more good than any verdict. 3 different people wrote in to say it had made them check their own county's fraud alert. My mother was never charged. There wasn't enough to tie her hands directly to the forgery, only to the warmth she'd used to try to empty my house. But everyone in Renfro read the paper. The woman who'd spent a lifetime curating how the family looked from the outside got to watch the outside learn exactly what she was. She and I do not speak. My father writes me letters now, real ones, in his shaky hand, and I read them, and I have not written back yet, but I have not thrown them away either. As for the house, I changed every lock myself the next morning with my own hands, and I re-enrolled in the fraud alert before I'd even had my coffee. Then I hung one stocking by the fireplace. It had one name on it, mine. The next Christmas, I set the long table by the windows, the one I'd pictured the first day I walked through the empty house. I filled it with the people who had actually shown up for me, the employees who'd become friends. Penny, who turned out to be loyal under all the gossip, a few neighbors from Maple Hollow, 12 places, every one of them full, and every one of them set on purpose. For 20 years, I believed belonging was something my family could grant me or withhold, like a chair they chose not to bring out. It never was. Belonging was never theirs to give or take. It was a table I finally set for myself. That Christmas, the biggest house on the street finally felt like mine. A locksmith on my porch, a forged name on a deed, a room full of red and blue light. If you have ever been the empty chair at someone else's table, set your own this year and lock your own door. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment below and subscribe.